So, hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at the top of this large rock. Below this rock is this ancient cave where they built a kuti, and I'm staying there for Vasa. And so I thought to record a short Owada for the internet, so I thought they could start with just a little meditation. So I can lean forward a bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in, and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose, around the face, can just let those relax. And can relax any patterns of tension around the cheeks, around the chin. And can practice breathing in and out from this area at the tip of the nose. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, it can be good to keep mindfulness as continuous as possible, being aware all the way through the in-breath. As the in-breath turns to the out-breath, all the way through the out-breath, and as the out-breath turns back to the in-breath again, trying to make mindfulness as continuous as possible. And if the mind wanders off to the past or the future, you can bring it back to the present moment, to the breath. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And you can open our eyes and do a short Owada for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Ditiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Ditiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Ditiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So I hope that everybody is keeping well wherever it might be. And got the news, I think it was last week, August 6th. August 7th, I got the news that actually one of my early meditation teachers had passed away. His name was, they called him Samu Sunim. He was originally a bhikshu in the Korean Jogye order, which is a celibate order that's devoted to meditation. And he later came to North America and left the status of a bhikkhu and became a minister, a priest, full-time Buddhist teacher, living a full-time Buddhist teaching life, and founded his own order of non-celibate priests and Dharma teachers, they called them. Priests were full-time in the temples. And Dharma teachers could live like a household life and come to teach at the temple from time to time. So his order was called the Buddhist Society for Compassionate Wisdom, and it actually he had quite a big impact on my life as a young man. So I thought to do a short kind of owada, I guess you call it, in gratitude to him and his teachings, gratitude to the opportunities that his order has made available. So when I was a young man, I actually was a bit of a rough character. Kind of hip-hop was very popular then. It was starting out, and I think these days that hip-hop music is different. It's not as like violent or gangster. But those days when I was starting out, kind of when it was becoming very popular, had these kind of rappers, Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur, and they were all they had very rough lives growing up. They came from the slums. And so this kind of popular culture of like a gangster rap was very pervasive at the time I was young. So when I was a young man, I kind of fell into that culture and started, doing all these things that were considered good in that culture, kind of many different kind of illegal things, partying and selling drugs and these kind of things. And it was not a very happy culture, but that was what I fell into in high school. So towards the end of my time in high school, there were different incidents that happened, but anyways, towards the end of my time in high school, I encountered Buddhism. And this is just kind of an accident, like a bit of a joke. My mother gave me this book as a joke, and initially started kind of going around and after encountering the Buddhist teaching, got really converted and going around and talking with people a lot about them. It's kind of just basically the philosophy. And notice that this was not really having an effect on reducing my suffering much. I was kind of still suffering quite a lot despite talking about Buddhist philosophy all the time. It was kind of a very strong lesson. I still remember it to this day, that just the words in the text are very beautiful, very inspiring intellectual structures, but they're not sufficient. In and of themselves, some special people can gain insight just by hearing them, but generally one has to practice. And so after a certain amount of time feeling this kind of suffering, kind of wanted to find a way to reduce it. And so ended up Googling Meditation Toronto on the internet, and Sunim's temple was the first one that came up. So it's called the Zen Buddhist Temple in Toronto, and they offered these different meditation programs. They had like a meditation service on Sunday and a membership. You could become a member, and then they had a longer meditation session on Wednesdays, and they had retreats throughout the year. So at that time, a number of different things happened in my life at that time, but the temple was actually very pivotal. The temples that Sunim established were very pivotal. As kind of the year before, in grade 12 when I was in high school, in this kind of hip-hop culture, you have these kind of different groups of people. Okay, you have your group, they call it like a crew, a clique, have different names for that. And sometimes different groups of people fight. It's kind of the different cliques get into fights, especially if they're from different schools. So towards the end of my time in high school, in those days they had a grade 12, which was pretty much everybody finished that. Even to get a job as like a mechanic, I think you need basically everything you needed at least high school diploma for. But then if you wanted to go to university, they had this other level called grade 13 or OAC. And you basically had to have all these different OAC level courses, and those were the ones that mattered for getting you into university. So at the end of grade 12, there was this new kid who came to my school. It was kind of from a different school. And he started to challenge this the group of friends that I had. There was this one fellow who was very kind of tough. It was kind of because you call him like the lead guy in that crew, in that group of friends. And he came up and started trying to he was new. He came and started trying to challenge him, saying all these different things. So then at the end of that year, towards the end of that year in grade 12, that young man was walking towards a door, and this fellow, my friend, kind of ran up behind him and actually elbowed his head through this window. And this gentleman didn't like that, obviously, but at the time I was running this, telling all this story for a Dhamma reason, basically to show my gratitude to Sunim and his temples and kind of the things they did. At the time, I posted this on the internet, this kind of this story about what happened. Basically, embarrassed this fellow very badly. He got very angry about that. So grade 12 ended. At the end of grade 12 in the summer, I found Buddhism, and then as the year started in OAC, it's kind of about half of the people, these kind of party guys, and half of our friends, and many of them left in grade 12 because they didn't want to go to university. So there's just a small. A smaller group of people left in high school at that time for OAC. So at the beginning of OAC, this is when I found this kind of a meditation teaching of Sunim's, and it was kind of very amazing. It's kind of trying to turn your life around, trying to study. I found that practicing meditation, I could study for 3 hours. I was kind of very amazed. I was goofing off for most of high school. And then practicing this meditation, suddenly I could gain this incredible, I was able to gain much more discipline than normally could. And just all these very excellent things started coming into my life. And then one day showed up at school and noticed that this fellow, my friend, his face was all puffy. And kind of then noticed another friend of mine, his face was puffy. And what had ended up happening was that new guy from the year before, he ended up coming back to the school that following year and came with his group of friends. And apparently they came with some guns and these different things. And they found my group of friends where they were hanging out, and they beat them up and kind of threatened them and these kind of things. I wasn't there. I think I was actually in the library studying. So actually, let me tell that portion of the story later, but it's kind of some very amazing protections that can happen with the Dhamma, with following the Dhamma. I was kind of one of the initiators of this, what embarrassed this kid, but I was never touched, never hurt. So in any event, this happened and started, the usual thing you do in that situation is you retaliate. So we started meeting with my friends, and I was kind of initiating, we should retaliate, we should have this kind of a retaliation and get them back. At the time, in Pickering and that area in general, it wasn't as dangerous as it is now. Now I think there are guns in Pickering, and I heard in recent years people were getting killed there. But in my time, it wasn't like that. Although it was starting to be like that. I think the following year somebody got killed in another high school in Ajax or something, or at least shot. So we decided I wanted to kind of have this retaliation. But notice that whenever I started wanting to retaliate against this fellow and kind of going forward these plans, all the good things that had been happening, coming from meditation, started to fall away. There's kind of all these benefits that I'd gotten started to fall away. This is kind of a very strong lesson, actually, as well. that kind of basically, if one wants to advance in one's meditation practice, one has to have right intention. Can't be a kind of evil person and also gain the benefits of meditation. Can't be a person who isn't devoted to renunciation and gain the benefits that come from meditation. So I went to the temple at the time. My first meditation teachers there were two gentlemen named Anjali and Anicca. And I discussed this with Anjali, and he said, you shouldn't retaliate. Kind of if you give him a notch and he gives you a notch, there's basically no end to that. It's kind of very excellent advice. So what I ended up having to do for basically that whole year was I would see this fellow in the hall, and he would always be threatening to kill me and threatening to have his friends come and kill me and these kind of things. I basically just had to endure it. There was more or less nothing much I could do about it. I was kind of basically had to stop encouraging these meetings and more or less hide out in the library studying. So later, didn't know anything about the Pali Canon at that time, but later remember reading about the sutta with Angulimala. And it's kind of, he does all these bad things, and then he has this kama vipaka come up when he starts trying to want to do good. And the Buddha says to him, bear it, just bear it. So for that year, I basically just had to bear these kind of bad things that were coming up both from that kid. And then there were other people who I'd, over the course of my high school life, that I'd offended and got into fights with and done bad things to. And some of those started to ripen in this last year in high school too. And through all of this, the temple that Sunim had founded, this Toronto Zen Temple, was a real refuge for me. I would go there every week for their program, and I would go to their Wednesday meditation program. And so long as I was trying to move in the direction of doing good, of turning my life around, these meditations were extremely helpful. It kind of felt like it gave an enormous boost in the ability to change character. So it was a very wonderful service having these temples. Later on in university, after that I ended up going to university, and later on, a while later, I still remember the first time Sunim actually came to the temple himself. We used to call him Sunim. In the Korean Choge order, they call all the monks Sunim, and he adopted that name, but it only applies in the order he founded to the most senior strata of priests. The other ones are not called Sunim, they're called Reverend or something like this. So in any event, we used to call him Sunim. That's what we called him. And he showed up one day, and I remember I remember seeing him hit the moktak. And later on, there's this kind of wooden fish. He was very stern. Go into meetings. I remember they had these Zen meetings where you'd come in and you'd be face to face with the Zen teacher after your meditation. I remember my first one, I came in there and I was like, hey, how's it going? It's kind of no idea how to behave towards Buddhist teachers. And he was not having that. He was just not willing to accept that kind of behavior. And over time, I started to get more involved in the temple. And they had these retreats. They had these kind of 5-day retreats, which they called Youngmin Jungjins. In Korea, the Youngmin Jungjin, they have these 3-month retreats. And in the middle of the retreat, the monks go through this phase where they don't sleep for 7 days. It's kind of this group retreat. It's just like an around-the-clock, no sleeping allowed retreat for 7 days. If you fall asleep, they kind of wrap you with this stick. And so he adapted this for lay people and had these 5-day retreats in the summer and winter. But of course, you could sleep. It's kind of, you could get up at 5. It was about, I think it was about 9 hours of sitting meditation. So I remember on my way to this first Youngmin Jungjin, I thought, the thought that I had was, well, I hope it's not too easy. And I remember going there and I had these plans, like, well, if it gets too bad, I'll just fall asleep when I'm meditating and nobody will notice the difference. But it was, the first one I went to was this incredible, difficult experience. It was the most physical pain I'd ever been in my life. And just my mind was going through these terrible contortions. I used to think I was this real tough guy. But at this Youngmin Jungjin, I saw these old ladies. They were sitting no problem, and I was struggling through the vast majority of that retreat. And I would go into these interviews with Sunim, and I don't think he thought very much. He didn't think very highly of my of my meditative abilities. I was probably the worst one on that retreat. And then towards the end of the retreat, I think there was just maybe one day left, something changed. And all of a sudden, I was able to meditate after enduring this intense physical pain for long periods of time. I was able to sit. All the various tricks that I'd tried, like falling asleep and cheating, all these different things I'd been able to do in school to get by or life to get by, they didn't work in a meditation retreat. And so I basically had to be a sincere person, trying to sincerely focus in on my meditation. That was the only way out. The only way out was to try to stay focused on my meditation topic. And so towards the end of the retreat, this kind of seemed to work. It seemed to click in. And I was able to, a Dharma student, they had these students there, invited me to do all these prostrations with them towards the end of the retreat, and I was able to do it. And I still remember Sunim saying to me, "Oh, it seems like you've gotten into the spirit of Yangmin Jungjin." So later on, after that first retreat, this was one of a very kind of, it's again like a life-changing event. It was kind of, it had this great impact on my life, kind of very accelerated quite a lot the efforts to do good that I've been trying to do. And then later on, my friends would say, they say, you really changed after that first retreat, this kind of Yangmin Jungjin. So in university, eventually both Anicca and Anjali, these two teachers who were my first teachers, left. And in university, Sunim came to the Toronto Temple full time, and I came there to live with him. And this was kind of, I asked if I could become a Dharma student, which was their like part-time teacher program. He said, no, you start with this kind of Dharma worker first. So I started with this lesser program. And it was a bit like being re-raised. It's kind of, actually, his teaching style, he was extremely ferocious and extremely no-nonsense. There was absolutely, basically, there was nothing you could get by him. He would not tolerate like any type of back talk or any type of attempts to assert yourself. So this was actually something very good for me because of my background. I think that if there was a teacher who was less assertive, less strong in their approach, it wouldn't have helped me to change my character. All these different things would happen. There were times that I would, you'd be walking around in the hallways, and you'd look behind, and he'd be sneaking up to give you a punch in the head. He had these various ingenious ways of kind of teaching you to be present in the present moment. And if you missed very small things that he didn't tell you to do, he would come and get very ferocious with you. It's kind of like, you didn't open all the windows here. You'd be very ferocious. You have to be more mindful, kind of very harshly scolding. But despite all of that, he had this kind of this unwillingness to compromise in his teaching style. And because of that, there was nowhere I could run. And there was nothing I could do. I basically had to learn to become a humble person, like a submissive person, a person who respected authority. And these kind of all things that I had not been practicing in my lay life. There were fun times too. He would take us to like saunas and and he would do these, Zen has this crazy wisdom tradition. So you'd be walking down the road and he would suddenly start speaking. He called this language Yucatano. It's kind of, so he'd be like, gokorakada, gokorakada, and you had to try to figure out what he was saying. It was kind of, and he would speak that way to people randomly. It's like, you'd go, you'd be walking in the Chinese market and he'd just start, so he had these kind of fun times too, and this kind of ability to lighten the mood as well. But the main thing was that from his training in this Korean Chogye order, he took that training and applied it to lay people in this Zen order that he's founded. So it was this rare opportunity to actually receive a kind of a monastic type training, even though one was a lay person. I remember after living with him for a few years, I started to feel very guilty about these bad acts that I'd done when I was young. And on my way to university, I used to walk by this police station. And I used to start thinking to myself, this isn't authentic. I'm not being honest. I should go and confess these kind of criminal acts that I've done in my past. This is kind of had no idea about the Buddha's teachings on regret and remorse. Actually now, some of the things that we used to do are legal. Marijuana is legal. So you can buy and sell marijuana as much as you want in Canada. But in any event, this guilt started to build, and I just did not know how to deal with it. Didn't even recognize it as a hindrance. Thought it was a good thing. Coming from a kind of, my background, family background was Christian, so I had this kind of idea of guilt as being a kind of something that could wash away the bad deeds that you've done if you'd suffered for them enough. So I went to Sunim and told him what I was thinking, and he said, no, don't do that. Instead, do this repentance practice for 3 or 4 months. So for 3 or 4 months, I had to do like 300 prostrations and a certain amount of chanting and these kind of things. But it was a great gift and a great teaching, because without these kind of teachings, I could have gone in a really wrong direction. That would have been a very bad move. Actually, there was a rapper who felt really guilty about some of the bad things he'd done in his past, and I think he went and turned himself in. And they basically threw the book at him. It's kind of the legal justice system is meant to take people who are trying to hide their flaws and force them to pay for them. The religious system is something that takes in like a system where there's temples and monasteries and churches. This is what takes people who are looking to change their life and help them to change it. So in this way, having Sunim there, having these temples there was something invaluable for me at this kind of crucial and formative time in my life. So towards the end of that period, I actually ended up moving into the Zen Temple full-time. I felt like I was getting more happiness from my time in the Zen Temple, from my time practicing meditation, than I was from school. So, so I eventually decided to leave and become a full-time member of the Zen Temple. Eventually, I had this very great attraction to Theravada Buddhism. It was something that I always knew was there, but eventually decided that Mahayana Buddhism was not the best fit for me. So I left to join the Tisarana Buddhist monasteries. It was about a year old at that time, in 2008. But despite this kind of time with Sunim in this temple, I don't think I could have gone to Tisarana and stayed there without this training that he'd given me, without his unceasing, uncompromising efforts to remove the roughest aspects of my personality, to teach humility, to teach an attitude of service, and most importantly, to teach meditation and to teach this kind of a path to, ideally, to the deathless. So remember, Sunim used to, in the early morning, we used to do these kind of prostrations. Each time you go down and do a prostration, you had to say Kwanse Mposao, then you get up. And after 25 prostrations, you had to recite this gata. So the first gata was, great is the matter of birth and death. And then after another 25 prostrations, you'd say, impermanence surrounds us. There would be one person who yelled this out. So in the early days, that was my job. I had a loud voice, probably from doing too much yelling. And so that was my job. Then the third one was, be awake each moment. And the fourth one was, do not waste your life. So I'm not sure if Sunim composed these verses himself or where they came from, but they still ring true as this kind of very excellent summary of the Buddha's teachings. The temples Sunim founded, they're geared towards ministerial service. They basically provided me with this opportunity to see what living Buddhism was about, see the importance of the practice of meditation, and to learn the importance of actually living under a living teacher. It's one thing to kind of read the books and say, humility is good, this is good. It's another thing to actually live under somebody who does not tolerate any behavior to the contrary. And this, actually living with somebody like that, is what helps to alter a person's character. One can read 1,000 books and still have the same character. One can be inspired and make an effort, but it's a completely different thing living under somebody, which is why the Buddha established his system as an apprenticeship. And despite this fact that basically I became much more attracted to Theravada Buddhism, learning about the Korean Zen tradition, I basically became convinced, very inspired, that there were monks living in that tradition who were what we would call in Theravada arahants. There they called them Buddhas, we call them arahants. And so I like to think that what Sunim taught, what he pointed at, was the same thing. That I'd like to see what at least the texts are pointing at, what perhaps the deeper meaning of what his gathas, what his teachings are pointing at, is the same as what we're aiming at in Theravada Buddhism, which is the destruction of the taints in Nibbana. And those 4 Dhamma summaries kind of still ring true as a very excellent summary. It's kind of great is the matter of birth and death. It's kind of impermanence surrounds us. And be awake each moment and do not waste your life. Just remember these times going into these Zen interviews with Sunim. And the first times he would teach you to count down from 10. So like 10, and he would say, show me your practice or something like this. And you'd have to say it out loud. And from the wavering in your voice, if your voice wavered or not, he'd be able to tell if you were mindful through this whole countdown, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think we only had to count down from 5 in front of him. Eventually, after staying with him for a long time, he would give what was called this hwadu. It was kind of, in Japanese, they call it a koan. It was kind of this statement that's meant to help generate the spontaneous insight necessary to attain enlightenment. So the hwadu that he gave, I think, to many beginners was this one. It's called the what is it mu? And mu means nothing. So what is it? Nothing. So this is something that I still remember very vividly, kind of going into these interviews with him and having him test my practice in this way. So in all these ways, through his pointing out basic kind of goodness, basic kind of charity, through his establishing these temples as a place of refuge where people could go, where they could change their character. It was kind of he emphasized very strongly compassion and took in people who were a little bit rough around the edges, more than just me. There were other people too, but most importantly through hopefully what his teachings pointed at. Great is the matter of birth and death. Impermanence surrounds us. Be awake each moment and not to waste one's life. And that what we're aiming at is as the Buddha said, is a path, what the Arahants have is a path that can't be traced. And so want to join together with everybody else, all of Sunim's former students, his present students, whoever might wish him well on his onward journey, to express gratitude and wish him all the best on his path wherever he might be going, all the best on his path in the Dhamma, and wishing that whoever strives for it might realize what his koans were pointing at. It's kind of what is it? Mu. What is it? Nothing.